ago, there was an allegation he obstructed a very prolonged effort to get records back from him. So that was partly an obstruction case. You'll recall also, John, that was dismissed in July 2024 by a federal judge appointed by then President Trump, or then former President Trump, that the special counsel investigating it was unlawfully appointed. But none of that applies here. This is a Department of Justice case. And John, the prosecutor in the room was not one of those Trump political appointees, but a career national security prosecutor who's been there some time.
Yes, a key and important point. Let's turn now to Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, your reaction to this?
Well, President Trump himself has just weighed in. He was asked by a reporter in the Oval Office a few moments ago, John, what he thinks about this indictment. The president said he wasn't aware of it, but that he thinks that John Bolton is a bad guy and that this is what happens. Trump has been railing against Bolton for years because he views Bolton primarily as disloyal. Bolton was his national security advisor, a key role in Trump's first administration, and he was basically as close to him as Marco Rubio is now, who is in the same job, though he also serves as Secretary of State. But Bolton and Trump disagreed on a number of foreign policy issues, Russia in particular, and after Bolton left, he was critical of Trump, and Trump gave it right back to him, has railed against Bolton in social media and in public for years, and said a couple of weeks ago on True Social that he hoped that this would happen.
Nancy Cordes at the White House. Thank you. Former federal prosecutor Scott Frederickson joins us now. Scott, your reaction to this and what you think the challenge would be for prosecutors when it comes to having classified documents at home where you're not supposed to?
Well, my reaction is no surprise at all. We certainly have seen reports coming after the search of his home and office in August of this year. And the return of the affidavit in court that was partially unredacted that indicates he was in possession of classified documents. There's classified documents that are classified documents. His defense attorney has said, look, these documents date back to 20 years, and, most of these were approved. There seems to be three buckets the government was investigating. One is, did he possess classified documents that they found at his home and his office? Two, going back to his time in the first Trump administration, he wrote a book. There was a big dispute about whether he was using classified information. The Justice Department opened a criminal investigation, but that was closed, but not with prejudice. So that may have been reopened. And then the third bucket is there are reports that a foreign adversary had hacked Mr. Bolton's AOL.com email address, from which they apparently or maybe allegedly obtained classified information. That'd be a case of mishandling classified information.
Fascinating. Okay, Scott, thanks very much. Let's go back to Scott McFarlane. Scott, what do you know? We've learned more about the indictment.
We have a 26-page indictment just released, just unsealed. 8 charges here, 8 counts of the charge: transmission of national defense information and retention of national defense information. They're citing documents that he's accused of transmitting between September 2018 and, as I go to the bottom of this charging document, September 2019, over a 12-month period. John, they've assigned a judge to this case, Theodore Chung, in Greenbelt, Maryland, just outside of Washington. Chung is a 2013 appointee of then-President Obama.
Okay, Scott McFarlane, thank you so much for that. Once again, President Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, has been indicted on 8 counts over his handling of national defense information. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm John Dickerson.
We continue our breaking news here on CBS News 24/7. A grand jury in Greenbelt, Maryland just indicted President Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. This comes after court documents made public last month showed that Bolton was under investigation for a potential mishandling of classified information. So I'm going to go live now to CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson with more on this. We just heard about the indictment. Let's talk more about the scope of this. What does this all mean?
Well, obviously that remains to be seen. I mean, we're at the very beginning of a criminal case. Well, the first thing that happens, of course, is the investigation. Then what we saw today, which is going to a grand jury, making a determination. The grand jury makes a determination about whether or not there's enough for an indictment. And then the indictment really starts the clock towards a potential trial. We should really emphasize that word potential. Right now, the indication is, I believe this is a 26-page indictment, 8 different counts, and they focus on exactly what we thought they were going to focus on, which is the retention of classified material and apparently material dealing with the national defense. There was reporting that indicated that much of the investigation focused on the idea that John Bolton was making essentially diary entries in his AOL account that may have included classified information, including information related to national security, and that he may have shared that information with family members. Also reporting to indicate that foreign adversaries were able to hack into that AOL account and potentially obtain some of this information. So right now, that's kind of what we know. I will also point out that there's some indication that this case so far, even above and beyond the idea that we're looking at different crimes, looks different from the cases against Letitia James and James Comey, in that right now, in what we know indicates that career prosecutors were the one who went to the grand jury and said, here's our case. Do you think there's enough to indict? Whereas when it came to Letitia James and James Comey, indications were that the personnel in the Eastern District of Virginia essentially had to change over before that case was brought, that President Trump, in fact, appointed one of his personal attorneys to lead those cases, and that she was the one, Lindsay Halligan, who essentially either presented the case to the grand jury in the case of Letitia James, or was the only person to sign the indictment in the case of James Comey. This has some indicia of looking like a more typical case at this point.
Bolton's home, as we saw, was searched, classified files taken out, phone records, and then also the book that was written. Let's talk about what happens now with Bolton. This information coming out, grand jury indicts the former national security advisor for mishandling classified information. Let's talk about the scale and scope of things, how serious it is, and if you're Bolton, what happens now?
So the reporting right now, obviously this is a breaking news story, indicates that these are serious charges. Obviously, nobody wants to be on the receiving end of a federal indictment. There are a number of counts here, and they include something that's quite serious, which is having and retaining and potentially disseminating information that could put our country at risk. Now, what happens next? What happens next is that there will be an arraignment. Charges will be read against John Bolton. He will enter a plea based on what he said publicly. He will enter the plea of not guilty. And then there will be a discussion with the judge about scheduling. I know that doesn't sound particularly sexy, but a lot of what happens next will be based on a judge saying, here's a trial date, and now let's move backwards in time from that trial date and set all of the motion dates. What's going to happen also, I think we can bet that John Bolton could try and get this case thrown out on a motion to dismiss before you ever see a jury trial, which is, frankly, again, most cases do not go to trial. Obviously, we can't prejudge what's going to happen in this case.
Jessica, we were just showing a list of items that were retrieved. Can you talk more about what possibly they retrieved, or the information that they got from those items? 2 laptops, 2 computers, a USB drive, the U.S. Department of State diplomatic security binder, confidential documents. What entails information from that?
It's a great question. So what it looks like is that they're looking at both physical evidence, but also maybe electronic evidence. I know that might sound obvious, but when it comes to the execution of the search warrant, we know that John Bolton's computers were taken, that I believe phones were taken. And so that indicates that the investigators here are looking at not just about whether John Bolton may have taken a bunch of boxes and somewhere in those boxes there was classified material, but that he was actually working with that material. Maybe it was on his computer. Again, that maybe he had a diary going and that he was writing about classified information, and that that information wasn't stored in a safe way, in a proper way, and that others had access to that information. So I think, piecing together, again, what was taken from his home, what we could be looking at is a situation where there are allegations that he physically took folders, took documents that he should not have taken and retained those. And again, we're speculating here, but in addition, that there's a lot of information based on what he might have been writing in his emails, what he might have been writing on his computer outside of emails, and obviously what was on his phone as well. I think we can all guess that those things together will form the basis of this case as it moves forward.
And let's remind everyone, John Bolton served as National Security Advisor in Donald Trump's first term. He left the role after 17 months amid disagreements about Middle East policy. Trump said he asked Bolton for his resignation, but Bolton said he offered his resignation. And then after his departure, Bolton wrote a book about his time in the Trump White House. It is titled The Room Where It Happened, and it was very critical of President Trump. The first Trump administration tried to stop the publication, arguing it contained classified information. Bolton has denied any wrongdoing. So this has clearly been something that's leading up to today's indictment. But that is quite a lengthy list, and he has quite the history with President Trump.
Well, he does. And so what looks similar from this case to the other indictments that we've seen recently is that John Bolton has been, I think, a political enemy of the president for quite some time now. And I think you laid out all the reasons why that has been the case.
All right, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for your insight on this important day. Breaking news now. We're going to continue this. The Takeout with Major Garrett is next. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
John Bolton indicted. In the first Trump term, he was National Security Advisor number 3. There were 4, you might remember. Then he became a perceived enemy. Now he faces federal charges. Trump and Putin plan another summit to end the Ukraine war. Location, Budapest. Date, unknown. Actually on the calendar, President Zelensky at the White House tomorrow. He hunts deer, owns handguns, quotes the Bible, and leads crowds in singing America the Beautiful. He's running for governor of Iowa. Meet Democrat Rob Sand. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to The Takeout. Just because it was expected does not make it any less unusual. The Trump Justice Department indicted John Bolton today over alleged misdeeds that could have, in part or in full, been prosecuted during the first Trump term. The charges, as so far as we know them, relate to classified documents in Bolton's possession, part of a book he wrote, and an AOL email account. Yes, an AOL email account. They're still around, though they're not nearly the rage they once were. Bolton will, of course, get his day in court. He joins other perceived enemies of President Trump in federal legal jeopardy. Former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. The White House yesterday, President Trump, with top justice officials standing nearby, said this about other potential charges against others in the political universe, namely California Democratic Senator Adam Schiff.
They have committed massive political crime. I hope they're looking at Shifty Schiff. I hope they're looking at all these people. And I'm allowed to find out. I'm allowed to, I'm, in theory, the chief law enforcement officer. But I have a very good, talented group.
That is a novel theory. President as chief law enforcement officer. Historically, that has been the Attorney General. But if the Attorney General acts entirely at the direction of the president, then in a linear, though not necessarily constitutional fashion, that would make this president the nation's de facto chief law enforcement officer. Trump directed the indictments of Comey and James, so some dispassionate observers might describe something of a pattern here. For more on the Bolton indictment, and we have just received the paperwork on it, So this is a complex story that is evolving before our very eyes. We turn to Nicole Skanga. As I understand it, Nicole, 18 counts.
18 counts in total, Major. The 26-page indictment was initially sealed. It's just been unsealed. The U.S. grand jury in Maryland indicted former National Security Advisor John Bolton on criminal charges relating to the transmission of national defense information and the retention of national defense information. Now, reading through these counts, I was able to count 16 of them relate to Bolton's handling of top secret information, the highest classification given by the U.S. government. And just looking over the documents, now I can read some to our audience. On or about August 22nd, the FBI executed search warrants. They seized material from Bolton's residence in Maryland and office in Washington, D.C. Of course, we knew about that FBI search. And here, if you continue to read, you can see the FBI seized hard-copied printed versions of Bolton's diary entries, including documents that relate to the national defense and contained classified information. They're described below in some of these counts here. So we're still reading over some of the specifics. Some of them have to do with a personal email account. Some of them have to do with classified information that was exchanged between Bolton and some of his advisors.
And this would have been within his time of government service.
Within his time of government service. He was National Security Officer, as you know, for about 17, 18 months under the Trump administration in the first term before they parted ways.
There was sound from the president on this topic. He was asked about what he knew or did not know about the pending possibility of a Bolton indictment. Let's listen.
I didn't know that. You tell me for the first time, but I think he's, a bad person. I think he's a bad guy. Yeah, he's a bad guy. It's too bad, but it's the way it goes.
What else have we been able to glean so far, Nicole?
So far, we have learned 18 counts, Major. Again, all of them related to the transmission of national defense information and the retention of national defense information. We also learned that a representative for Bolton contacted the FBI back in 2021 to alert the FBI that they believe that Bolton's representative to be the Islamic Republic of Iran had obtained unauthorized access to one of Bolton's personal email accounts. So we are learning new information about how the FBI might have first learned about a possible compromise to Bolton's personal email account. Some concern here, Major, although we're still reading through these documents, of exposure potentially to a foreign adversary, including Iran.
As I mentioned, this paperwork has just come in our possession. Nicole is reading it now. Nicole, I'm going to give you a moment or two to keep reading, as you are so capable of doing, and then referring new information to us. I'm going to turn to the wall over here. We call this affectionately wall number one. Scott Frederickson will join me now, former federal prosecutor. So where are we? There you are. You're on wall one now. Scott, again, I want to remind our audience, I'm going to keep saying this throughout the program. This has just happened. We are just going through the indictment. Taking that on board, what are your initial observations?
Well, the fact of the indictment is no surprise. We all knew this was coming. It all depends on the details and the facts. There are thousands of instances of classified documents that end up in former government officials' hands, if you will, or at their homes, and they're never charged. The difference is, what's the level of classification? If they are top secret, that's the highest level, that's very serious. What proof of intentionality is there that Mr. Bolton intentionally, knowingly mishandled this information? What we know leading up to the indictment is that the government seemed to be focusing on three buckets. One was stemming back to his original time during Mr. Trump's first term as president. Mr. Bolton wrote a book, and there was a large dispute with the Trump administration of whether he was using classified information. A criminal investigation was begun, but kind of petered out. There was a civil lawsuit, and that was resolved. The second bucket is documents that were seized at Mr. Bolton's Bethesda, Maryland home. That's why the indictment's in Maryland, and at his office in Washington, D.C. Were there top secret documents there that he had in his possession. We don't know if that's the subject of the indictment. And the third part is interesting. Apparently, Mr. Bolton was using an AOL email account and apparently or allegedly had information, classified information on that account that was hacked and intercepted by a foreign adversary. We don't know if that's part of the indictment yet.
You mentioned the key word, which I've heard communicated many times in this general sphere of prosecution, intentionality. What did you know and what did you willfully defy in terms of your handling of classified information? Walk my audience through how important that is.
That's critical because the criminal statute requires intentionality. This is not a statute, a criminal statute that is used for indicting people who mistakenly hold on to documents when they had no intention of doing so. Or when they have them, they alert the government and say, hey, I've got this, I'm going to bring them back. This statute is not for those situations. It's when an individual knowingly, intentionally takes a document or retains a document, knowing he has no business to them, or when the government alerts them and says, we want them back. And that was the case with former President Trump in his first term, allegedly, and he refused. So intentionality is required here, and prosecutors don't take cases unless, and they shouldn't, unless they can prove by circumstantial evidence or otherwise that this individual knew what they were doing and intentionally kept or retained highly classified documents.
And Scott, you mentioned that third bucket, an AOL email account. Historically, can you be prosecuted if someone hacks your account, or is it prosecutable just if you had something deemed classified, top secret or otherwise, in what the government regards as a less than secure email place?
I think the answer, Major, is that yes, you could be prosecuted. It just depends, again, on what proof there is of your knowledge that, say, you were using an unsecure website. So if you're the national security advisor, you bring home highly classified, top secret documents, or that you use them or refer to information in them on an unsecure website, you're subject to being indicted. But again, it all depends on the facts. But you know, every government official is schooled on how this works. And when you're dealing with the highest classified documents, you have no business putting them on or putting information contained in them on an insecure website such as AOL.com.
Scott Frederickson, thank you so very much. On the fly, giving us excellent context, legal analysis. Nicole, I want to turn to you. The pages I heard as my back was turned to you somewhat rudely. I apologize for that.
We have been reading vigorously over here, Major, and I do want to share what I think are some of the key passages in this indictment. We are learning that between April of 2018 and August of 2025, Bolton, according to this court document, abused his position as national security advisor. It alleges he shared more than 1,000 pages of information about his day-to-day activities as national security advisor, including information that was classified up to top secret SCI level with 2 unauthorized individuals. They're named individuals 1 and 2. We don't know exactly who these individuals are. He also unlawfully, according to the indictment, is accused of retaining documents, writings, and notes relating to the national defense of the country up until top secret SCI level at his home in Maryland. Interestingly enough, while he was serving as national security advisor between April 2018 and September of 2019, he's sent these diary-like entries on almost a daily basis. He used a personal non-government email, such as emails hosted by AOL and Google, the indictment says, to email information classified up to top secret level. At no point did he have the authorization to store or transmit the classified information that he sent to these 2 individuals, or even to store them. And then this is interesting. This is what we touched on earlier, Major. At some point in September 2019, between September 2019 and July 2021. A cyber actor believed to be associated with Iran hacked that personal email account and gained unauthorized access to that account, which Bolton had previously used to email these two unauthorized individuals. A representative for Bolton notified the U.S. government in July of 2021, but did not tell the U.S. government he had classified information. So that seems to be when the U.S. government was first tipped off to a potential breach, frankly, of this personal email account that was later found to have
And that is
classified
information outside of his time as National Security Advisor. So these things are then and they are later than that. Nicole Skanga, reading on the fly, translating beautifully. That's not easy to do. I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. President Trump, there's more news today, lots of it. President Trump said he and President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, will meet in Hungary to discuss the end of the Russia war in Ukraine. That announcement came following what the president described as a productive phone call today between the two leaders. Our Nancy Cordes joins us now from the White House. Nancy, what do we know?
What we know, Major, is that this comes as something of a surprise that President Trump is willing to sit down once again, one-on-one with Vladimir Putin without any assurances from Putin that he will also meet with Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, even after President Trump sat down one-on-one with Putin for the first time back in August and received indications then that Putin would be willing to move forward on this peace deal and potentially sit down with his Ukrainian rival. So, it's unclear why the president is basically giving this major prize to the Russian president without getting what he had been seeking in return, which was a trilateral meeting involving himself and Putin and Zelensky. But one White House official said to me today that this is a president who's looking for peace, and if this is a meeting that will help move things in that direction, then he's willing to do it.
As I mentioned in the open of the show, we don't have a date for this meeting in Budapest, though Budapest has long been discussed privately as a likely location of a meeting of this kind. We do have something on the calendar tomorrow. Zelensky and the president at the White House.
Right. And that is a long-planned meeting. At that meeting, Zelensky will likely push President Trump once again to allow him to buy long-range Tomahawk missiles that Zelensky could use to fire deep into Russia. Zelensky has been talking about the fact that his country is being pummeled, its infrastructure, its energy facilities being hit by a barrage of Russian drones and missiles once again just last night. And interestingly, a short time ago, President Trump did say that he brought up those Tomahawk missiles in his conversation with Putin today, a 2.5-hour conversation, by the way. Trump, in a somewhat joking manner, said that he told Putin, how would you feel if I give your opponent 1,000 or 2,000 Tomahawk missiles? What do you think about that? And he said Putin doesn't like it very much. But Trump has been kind of dangling this possibility for months, Major, but he hasn't committed yet. And today, even as he was saying that he might do it, he also made a point of saying that the U.S. needs its own stockpile of Tomahawk missiles, implying that perhaps we don't have any to spare.
In the Russian readout of the phone call, Russia noted that the Tomahawk missile conversation came up. Putin told the president, according to the Russians, it would have no practical effect on the battlefield. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but would seriously harm U.S.-Russia relations. Nancy Cordes, North Lawn of the White House, thank you very much. Still to come, the shutdown of the federal government will continue into next week. Another failed vote and the Senate leaving Washington. Our reporter talks to Americans now feeling the financial squeeze. Plus, Iowa farmers sound the alarm over Trump administration's $20 billion, maybe it's going to be $40 billion, planned bailout for Argentina. What Democratic candidate for governor Rob Sand has to say about trade woes in Iowa and its soybean farmers. Plus, President Trump issues Hamas a new warning over violence in Gaza and the release of deceased Israeli hostages. I will speak to a former ambassador, his name is Michael Oren, on the non-conventional approach 3 real estate moguls, you know one of them very well, took to achieve a ceasefire and win the release of Israeli hostages. All that. Takeout returns in 90 seconds.
Clearly fun.
Smart. Clearly uplifting.
Clearly CBS Mornings.
On Face the Nation, you try to separate the noise from the news. You need to be able to have an actual conversation.
The CBS Evening News. In-depth reporting.
We took a look at first-time homebuyers. Do you think it's more of a seller's or a buyer's market right now?
Grab this.
How do you squeeze 4 years of medical school into 3?
The CBS Evening News.
Go to the ends of the earth.
A great adventure together.
Come on in. And reach for the stars.
We'll hit the heights.
Bingo.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
I'm Natalie Morales. Listen to 48 Hours NCIS wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh, wow. Look at this.
Let 60 Minutes take you on a private tour of the National Archives.
So there may be treasures like this buried in boxes.
Historical secrets from America's past.
So this is original from 1778?
I can see clearly.
CBS Mornings Plus, clearly more news, more smart conversation.
More money-saving tips, more recipes.
More uplifting ways to get you on your way.
Plus, more sports, more weather.
Clearly more CBS Mornings.
Plus,
Sunshiny day.
Welcome back to The Takeout. The Senate today failed for the 10th time to advance a Republican-drafted bill to end the government shutdown. Another measure that failed today in the Senate, a long-term Pentagon funding bill. Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me now from Capitol Hill. Caitlin, let's set aside for just a second the stall and talk to us about people you have met feeling a noticeable financial burden because of this government shutdown.
Yeah, well, Major, right now on Capitol Hill, there is such a lack of urgency around this shutdown. I mean, it's really remarkable. The Senate left around 2 o'clock this afternoon. They're not going to be back until Monday. The hallways, you can hear my echo, it is empty here. So there's not a sense of urgency on Capitol Hill. Meanwhile, we've been talking to federal workers who have been laid off who say this is very urgent. And we spoke specifically yesterday with a fired scientist from the CDC. She had worked there for the past decade, working on chronic diseases, studying things like diabetes and heart disease. And she said she was fired over the weekend. There's a lot of limbo that these people are now facing, given that court order. So there's some uncertainty there. But she told us that public health, Major, is at stake with some of these firings. Take a listen to our conversation.
They went in and fired entire programs, even statutorily mandated by law programs. They cut entirely.
So everything you were working on just comes to a complete stop?
Yes.
For everyday Americans, is their health, their public health at risk?
Absolutely. It's going to mean more deaths, more preventable deaths. People will absolutely die from the impact